prior to COVID-19, we had a situation where there was a ton of demand for buildings and very, very little supply. What's going to be interesting is what happens over the next several months. It's really too early for us to tell what's going to happen as the direct fallout of COVID-19, but certainly we think there's going to be more buildings available, which is going to balance out that vacancy rate and bring it up a little bit. Yeah, we suspect that the future for industrial actually looks pretty good. You know, in general, American businessmen are very innovative. And right now, I talked to a client earlier today, and they went from almost no business to making beds, hospital beds that were actually going to be put in the Van Andel Arena. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but they made the beds through a Stryker contract. And, you know, the same company has a metal shop, and in that metal shop, they're making stands for hand sanitizers, and they're making brackets, and they're making all these different parts and pieces for future hand sanitizers that I think we're all going to get accustomed to seeing when we walk into any building.
You know, it's definitely been slowed things down in terms of new activity. A lot of the people I'm talking to are kind of in a wait and see mode, just kind of see how this whole thing plays out for a few months. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, let's talk in July. But then again, I've also had a lot of people that I've talked to that we had deals under contract and leases under contract that they're still plugging forward and still want to get them done because they're long-term facilities for them, and they kind of view this as more of a short-term problem. So, but overall, it's been quiet the last 6 weeks. But
I think another factor that's going to come into play, and it could be very beneficial for the U.S. economy, is long-term. I think a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of my clients, are very frustrated with what happened with China and just overseas in general manufacturing. So we're hopeful that a lot of that overseas manufacturing will come back onshore to the United States and will become more dependent upon U.S. manufacturing and less on overseas.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were kind of surprised at just how dependent we were on China and overseas manufacturing. And, I think a lot of that supply chain will come back to the United States over the next year or 2 years. I think people, they also don't forget this type of thing, when you go through this, and they maybe in the near term will be a little more cautious in moving forward, just kind of sit still for a little while.
Yeah, I would agree. I think most of my clients, they're still working in some capacity. The wind was taken out of people's sails, but I think a lot of people are getting sick of the stay-at-home order, and I noticed the traffic today was significantly higher than it has been in the past. So I think you're getting segments that are starting to go back to work. And with summer around the corner here, hopefully, finally in West Michigan, we're going to get some nice weather. And that last 70-degree day we had, everyone was in a better mood, and hopefully things return back to, it's going to be a new normal.
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time just calling people, talking with them, see how they're doing, work, life, health, whatever, just see how people are doing. I realize that most people aren't rushing to buy, sell, or lease real estate right now. They're just kind of sitting tight, but more so just see how people are doing, stay in touch, make sure everybody's okay.
I'm working with some clients that are considered essential services, and they do have some immediate needs. I got one client that has a lease coming up in a few months, and so we got to find them a new place to call home. And so that business continues. I think executive CEOs, business owners have more time on their hands than they've had in the past. So I found when I'm talking to my clients that they have more time to spend with me, and they sometimes even welcome the phone call and want to, chat for a while just about life in general.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting, but all of our kids are doing not homeschool, but school at home, or whatever they call it, distance learning. So every morning they all sit down and do school, and so they have a lot of questions. So I've been helping a lot with math, and especially with our so we have a fourth grader, and if you've ever tried, that's the hardest part of my day. I'll talk to somebody in the afternoon about like helping them do a 1031 exchange and, you know, navigating through that, and teaching my fourth grader how to convert decimal points to fractions like 20 times harder than that.
A lot easier to figure out a cap rate than figure out what 1/4 is.
Yeah.
So my only funny story is right when this thing first hit, I decided probably a little bit late, but I wasn't going to be on my laptop for 3 or 4 weeks. So I went to Best Buy, and guess what? All the large monitors were gone. So I'm talking to the guy, trying to be creative, and he's like, well, you can go to Muskegon and pick one up. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to drive to Muskegon. And he says, well, why don't you just buy a TV? So I said, okay. So we talked about what adapters you had to use for a TV. So that's what I decided to do. Well, it's kind of like sitting in the front row of the movie theater when you're sitting there looking at a very large flat screen about 3 feet from you. So it works, but you got to back up a little bit. Yeah. So we'll see. What my kids are fighting over who's going to get that TV when this thing is done.